That's some good drugs. Now, I'm just drinking coffee, so that may sound a little odd when I say I'm using drugs right now. But according to the textbook definition of a drug, that's exactly what I'm doing, right? The definition of a drug is any chemical substance that affects the functioning of a living organism. And right now, the caffeine in this coffee is getting me all energized. I got to put this cup of coffee down. Hold on. Okay. So as I said, it may sound odd for me to say that I'm using drugs by drinking coffee. But if we can accept that definition of a drug for a moment, and we can say I am using drugs by drinking this coffee, I think we can also say that you see nothing morally wrong with me using this drug right now in this presentation, right? The fact that I took a sip of coffee, there's nothing really morally wrong with that. Even if I start feeling a little energized, it might make the presentation more interesting, right? So you see nothing morally wrong with that. You would probably say that's morally permissible for me to use this particular drug in front of you right now. Similarly, in our society, many drugs are permitted both by law and, I would say, more importantly, by moral law in terms of what's moral and ethically acceptable. For instance, coffee and caffeine are clearly acceptable both by law and morality in our society. Alcohol and tobacco are permitted by law, and arguably there's nothing morally wrong with me smoking a cigarette or having a beer. In and of itself, you probably see nothing morally wrong with that, and our society agrees. In contrast, many other drugs are not permitted by law or morality in our society. Heroin, cocaine, and in the majority of the United States, not including Colorado and Washington, D.C., marijuana. These drugs are not permitted legally or morally. Why? And is this division between what's legal and what's prohibited, is it based on any justified or rational grounds? These are important questions because these drug laws affect everyone, right? One could argue that any drug law, any kind of drug prohibition is morally impermissible. David Bose will make that argument based on a rights-based theory. In contrast, one could argue that drug prohibition is in principle justifiable. Drug prohibition laws can be justified. Maybe not any drug prohibition law, but particular drug prohibition laws can be justified, and perhaps they can be justified based on paternalism. The idea that we will, or the government will, pass a law that prohibits a particular activity, but they're doing so to protect the individual, in this case the drug user, from harming themselves. People need protection from themselves. Those would be a paternalistic law. Those kinds of laws could be permissible. Robert Goodin will make that argument, and his argument will be based in Kantian moral theory ultimately. Let's now turn our attention to this moral issue and these important questions regarding this issue.